Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive! This week, I continue my in-depth series talking about the races of Spelljammer by talking about the Elves. Now, the Elves have some interesting comparisons to real world in them, especially real-world history in the late 1700s, early to mid 1800s. We'll get into that as we talk about them. First, though, I want to just say that last week I did a lot of talking about individual human ships. That was because human ships were so varied, there was no way to really talk about any sort of overarching theme on them. All the races coming forward are going to have more focused discussions about their ships. And this is going to be especially so with the Elves, who have only 3 main built by ships. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as I talk about Elves in Space! The Elves in Spelljammer deal with one key thing: the Elven Imperial Fleet. While not all elves are members officially of the Elven Imperial Fleet, the Elven Imperial Fleet does reserve the right to press gang any elves it encounters into the Imperial Fleet. The Imperial Fleet is based on the small island nation of Evermeet in the Forgotten Realms. This is their headquarters, so to speak. And this small island is defended by mighty magics and a massive fleet element that hangs around it. The Elves have gone out of their way to find worlds and settle them, regardless of what the population of said worlds believes. And the Elven Imperial Fleet will bring whatever forces are necessary to help put down said native populations of those worlds that they decide to colonize. Because they are there to help uplift those worlds into civilization. Sound familiar? It should. The Elven Imperial Fleet is pretty much the British in space, or the British Empire in space. And that is very much how you have to think of them. They are a rigid, hierarchical structure, chain of command going back to an island nation, and frankly, they have some of the better ships. They have a long-standing naval tradition. In fact, the entire culture of Elves in Spelljammer is based around the Elven Imperial Fleet. Even merchant ships are kind of part of the Elven Imperial Fleet. Think sort of like real-world merchant marines. And when you deal with Elves in Spelljammer, that's kind of what you're dealing with. You are dealing with the spacefaring elves basically being better than everyone else and knowing it. Even if they're not really. And they are what they are. This is probably one of the more unusual comparisons to be drawn for the elves in pretty much any setting. But yes, if you want to have your Spelljammer elves talk with a crisp, clear British accent, it is perfectly okay. Because that's where they were drawn from. So now we've talked about the inspiration of the elves and pretty much the monolith of their spacefaring culture. Oh, the groundling elves are pretty much varied and what you would normally expect. Pretty much the spacefaring elves are almost all high elves. You're not going to see very many of the other types of elves like gray elves or sea elves or drow. Well, you will see drow. They're just not affiliated with the Elven Imperial Fleet. They're an entirely different set of stuff. But overall, the Elven Imperial Fleet is important. You see, it is sort of the main source of dealing with pirates in Spelljammer. Wherever the Elven Imperial Fleet sets up a base, one of the first things that they start doing is they start hunting pirates, bringing them to heel. And then they start looking for worlds that they can colonize. And yes, I mean that in the literal sense of colonialism. The Elven Imperial Fleet is based around the concept of setting up elven colonies, protecting them, and bringing the wealth back to Evermeet. And once you get past that, you'll see why most elves who are PCs don't like the Elven Imperial Fleet and are kind of trying to avoid it. Most, that is. There are some who really, really, really like the idea of joining the Elven Imperial Fleet. Not many, but some. But once you talk about the Elven Imperial Fleet, you need to talk about their ships. And this is where things get kind of interesting. So, what makes the Elven ship so special? Well, let's start with this. They're not built. They are grown. Yeah, that's right. Each elven ship is grown. This is, of course, tailored to the individual ship that's being grown. The smallest ship, the flitters, are 1 ton and are either non-magical helm, so they can make planetfall, and, oh yeah, act as boarding ships and such. Or they have an actual spelljamming helm, which will let them kind of travel at speed within a system. They're small ships, they don't have any cargo or weapons. But the ship you're going to see the most from the elves is the Elven Man of War. This is a 60-ton warship. Now, because of how it's built, because it's grown, and it has this sort of gigantic moth or butterfly-like shape to it, it's more agile than other ships of its tonnage. Like, seriously, it's a maneuverability rating 6. I mean, maneuverability class C. So it is as agile as a dragon in a class where most things, in a tonnage range where most things are less agile. It can't land. It doesn't have good armor. Its armor rating 7. Meaning studded leather and a shield is its armor class equivalent. They all have a major helm, though, because they're over 50 tons. They have 2 medium ballistae, one on the port side, one on the starboard, a medium catapult on the bow, and a medium jettison aft. What a jettison is it basically, they load it with garbage and refuse and fire it. And if it hits something, it does damage. But that's not what makes them special. It's that they are living ships. And it's fairly easy to repair them. See, their hull is technically ceramic. But you can, if it takes damage, you can cut wood or stone or just about anything really in, put it in place, give it a bit, and the ship will grow over it. And so it can be maintained by anyone with any degree of carpentry. At the same time, while it doesn't say it, plant growth spells can sometimes repair them, if they're done right. Now, the other thing is that the wings of elven ships need constant pruning. The ships are constantly growing. Now, this leads to something interesting. A way that elven ships sometimes form elven bases. What the elves will do is they will fly several of their largest ships, the armadas, into a location. They will move them into a ring so that their wings are touching. And then they will let their wings grow together. And what that does is that creates a actual base out of multiple, usually 5, of some of the biggest ships in space. The Elven Armada is 100 structural tons. The Elven Armada carries 25 flitters, plus an assortment of other weaponry. And guess what? When you have 4 or 5 of these grown together into one ship, you have an absolute monster of a defense station. By the way, if you're wondering what an Elven Armada has, first off, they're maneuverability class D, which means they are actually more maneuverable than any other ship in that tonnage. They have 6 heavy catapults. They have 6 heavy ballista, 2 heavy jettison, and some of them have 3 bombards. Bombards are black powder using cannon. And they have 50 tons of cargo space. And a crew of between 40 and 100. So, as you can see, when you set up 5 of them into a ring, you're essentially creating a small space floating castle. Note, once you do this, they can't move. So, it doesn't really matter. But the purpose of the Elven Armada is to be a command ship. They are big. They are well armored. By well armored, I mean they have an armor rating of 5. Scale mail and a shield type setup. So they're a good, tough ship. And you've got to take down 5 of them once they formed a base. Good luck trying to get around them. Oh, if you get the brilliant idea of trying to fly through the middle of them, yeah, good luck getting hit by 10 heavy jettisons. Yeah, the elves know what they're doing, just like the British did. The elves don't need a huge variety of ships like the humans. The elven ships do exactly what they need to do. And that is it for the elves. Next week, we're gonna talk about the space dwarven ships and the space dwarves. So until then, I'd like you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.